Happy holidays, uh, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. If you're in Korea, I guess you're stuck with this very dreary, rainy weather, which is tragedy because what is supposed to happen is, you know, the sky was supposed to open up on Friday and Dangun was supposed to descend and we were supposed to enjoy some beautiful weather, 21, 22, uh, blue sky. Hopefully it shows up mid-October, but forecast looks like we will even return to class and we'll still be in this new thing we have in Korea called the fall rainy season. I hope this is just this year. It's like a very strange year, but for all of you, we have quite a few international students. This is not the way it normally goes. October is my favorite month, usually. Anyway, welcome back to our regularly scheduled, regularly. That's like saying nuclear instead of nuclear. Tough word to say, I guess. So many things have been happening in America these days. I don't know if you're aware of them, but when we get to America, we're going to have a lot to talk about. This is a culture class, which involves a lot of background knowledge to understand. So we're sticking to the British stuff right now, which is much safer and more predictable. As I told you before, remember, evolution and revolution. Whatever is happening in the United States right now, and I'm not the person to tell you exactly what's happening. I don't know if anybody knows that, but definitely demonstrating their revolutionary tendencies, where the British have a much longer history, and it's almost like the culture's separated into two branches, the revolutionary branch and the evolutionary branch. And this was my theory from the very beginning. That's why I called the book this. And things couldn't be better in terms of proving my point. So anyway, let's talk about the medieval times, which we're going back 1,000 years. Remember, the key event in British history, the number one year or number you have to know. I know this is not history class, but that year is the year. Sort of like, I don't know, I'm a fan of history, so I like to remember those dates and those people. For me, in Korean history, it's 1392 and 1592, right? There's a 200-year exact gap between the founding of the Chosun dynasty and the start of the Imjin War. So it's easy to remember. 1392, 1592. And after that, I guess you get a free pass kind of until 1945. If you're a Korean history major, then you don't get a free pass, but everybody else does. So anyway, this is the date. This is William the Conqueror, right? The Norman Conquest. And everything we talk about after this, I like to use the word medieval because that's the word that I was taught. So I'm just passing on what I think is one way of describing this period between somewhere for England, the medieval, like the high Middle Ages sort of kick in around the time I'm going to talk about today, which is we're going to talk about pretty much the 12th century and the 13th century. But shortly after 1066, there is some critical dates for European history in the 1090s, right? The Crusades happen. Then the Crusades will continue to happen periodically, but the First Crusade is the first and the third of however many. Some people say there's 6, some people say there's 8, some people say there's really only 2 that are important, the first and the third. because they're the ones that actually changed the shape of the Middle East. And as I told you before, religion is the sort of center. Everything revolves around religion, right? Okay. Usually I write before I start, but today I decided maybe it would be a little bit more dynamic if I wrote on the board as we go. So, everything is in the center of everything is religion. The center of the town, the center of the society, the center of the world map, right? So I said, if you look at a map now that's made by Europeans, it centers on the Atlantic. The Atlantic Ocean is full of fish and whales and sea creatures, not humans. So you would think that there would probably be sort of, at the center there would be a really important place that the entire world kind of focused on. And that place was the Middle East, right? Which some of us are Christian, some of us are not. But Christian, some of us are Christian. I got my cross here, but I'm not, a strict Christian by any means. Nothing like the people who lived back then. Anybody who thinks they're very religious now, if they ran into somebody from 900 years ago, they would not be included. They'd be thrown out. You'd be thrown out of the society for not being, religious enough. I know my Islamic students. Some of you consider yourselves very religious, and maybe you take pride in that, or maybe it's very important to your life. But it's not even in countries like Uzbekistan or Bangladesh or the Saudi Arabia or Iran or countries that are really influenced by religious law still, as opposed to British culture, which is really not. It's really a secular society now. Very few people go to church regularly in Great Britain, in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, in England. Some people call themselves Christians. Some people are very serious about it, but the majority of the people are just descendants of very religious people who were involved in this. The key thing for British society is that government starts taking care of the things that the church takes care of. So in a town, which we call a parish, there'll be some sort of minister, a priest, or an abbot, or maybe if it's a big town, then there'll be a cathedral and there'll be a bishop. If you're in Canterbury, there'll be an archbishop. These are all just ranks of people that belong to the church, and the church dictates everything, life and death and law and community, how you behave to each other. If you're sick, people help you through the church. If you're poor, people help you through the church. If you do something illegal or you do something wrong, you're punished by the church. That's the way everything is, right? It's a super Christian society. And in the Middle East, there's the Islamic conquest is long gone, and the whole area is under the control of various groups of Islamic empires in succession. Umayyad, probably I'm not pronouncing that properly, but they go all the way to Spain, long before the Crusades happen. So this is kind of a clash of civilizations, if you want to describe it like that. And you have to be careful about it, because I don't want to use terms that I don't know how to use properly, but sort of, if you think about holy war, that's what crusade is. So I guess some sort of opposite term for the Islamic side would be something like a jihad, right? Like declaring that you're going to war against the infidels. That's what the crusade is from the Christian perspective. It's very, I mean, they call it taking up the cross, and everybody, puts a red cross on their shields to identify themselves as like, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, the center of the world, right? The center of the map, the center of our life. We're committing ourselves to that. Why do they do this? That's up for debate. I don't think it has anything really to do, as much to do with the civilization of Islam, which is in its sort of golden age, in terms of, at least in terms of, scholarship, and it's much more extensive and powerful than the European civilization is at this time. So it's sort of like unexpected, I think, that the Islamic countries in the Middle East, in Syria, and Turkey, right? Turkey is still, Western Turkey is still controlled by Europe during this time. So Constantinople, which will become Constantinople, which will become Istanbul, right? When it's fully absorbed and reborn, sort of as a not a capital, but because I guess Ankara is the capital of Turkey. I've never been there, but the city is sort of reinvents itself as the center of the Ottoman Empire much later. But anyway, Constantinople until 1453, for another 400 years or so, it's still going to be a Christian city, and it's still going to be sort of the eastern border of the civilization, which we call European, because of the continent, but it's Roman. And as I told you, Britain is, I mean, you can't get anything more British than a Romanized sort of British reference. And I was thinking about how to explain this to you all in a way that would be interesting. And I've never described it this way before, but I think you might combine some elements of British culture from a long time ago and today, and really understand how they're all connected by referencing something like a British football club. Okay? Now, I think you all know Manchester, probably. Manchester City, Manchester United. We will talk about the Industrial Revolution and why Manchester is important in that sense. But most people are aware of those clubs because they're owned by people from the Middle East. Not Manchester United, but Manchester City. Paris Saint-Germain is owned, I think by Qatar, and a wealthy Middle Eastern guy owns an Islamic guy owns Manchester City, and recently Manchester City has been a very dominant club, especially in England, but overall, part of that has to do with a lot of money. Anyway, you probably don't know, you probably know Liverpool because my favorite player is Mohamed Salah, and he's from Egypt, and they call him the Pharaoh. Sometimes they call him the King of Africa or whatever. But he's Islamic, and I think he's just a fantastic player and has a great personality. He represents Egypt very well, and Islam as well. He's a respectful player and a dominant player, and he's my favorite. Mo Salah. So anyway, if you know who he is, if you don't, and you don't care about soccer, and that's all of that information kind of goes past you. But there is a club called Everton, which is traditionally Catholic, whereas Liverpool is traditionally Protestant. And Liverpool has these two clubs, just like Manchester, Everton and Liverpool. The reason I mention Liverpool is because I've been cheering for them since I was a Manchester United kid because of David Beckham in the 90s. And then when I came to Korea, I sort of converted. I liked the Liverpool club. In the early 2000s, I've been watching them ever since. And recently, Mo Salah, my favorite player, plays for Liverpool. It happens to be the Egyptian Muslim from Egypt, who's made me like Liverpool even more. Everton and Liverpool have had very intense clashes between their fans because of this religious difference. We'll have to talk about how the Christian church divides itself later. But Everton has a tradition, very strong tradition that's associated with religion, but it's also associated with Britain. Nil satis ni optimum. And if I went to Liverpool, I'd probably get beat up by a Liverpool fan for mentioning Everton positively. How dare you do that? So I won't go to Liverpool, and I'll just wear red and stay away from Everton and not talk about them because I don't know what's going to get me in trouble. But here, I think I'm safe. There's no crazy Everton fans or Liverpool fans around me, as far as I know. So nil satis ni optimum. That's Latin. It's Roman for. Basically, the translation is a nothing is satisfying. Only the best. Only the optimal conditions. So we say, in English, we say only the best is good enough, right? Now this is on their crest. Only the best is good enough. This is on the club crest. So it's got like a tower and the date it was founded, which I don't know. Again, probably going to get beat up by an Everton guy. But that's the translation of it. All of these things really kind of dovetail. And by dovetail, I mean two birds flying together. That's just an expression for things that work well together. They match. Everton sort of represents all those things. The wealth, the leisure, right? You don't get to play sports in your society unless you have enough money to allow some section of your population. The Industrial Revolution starts to free up money and people to do things like professional sports. The British actually originally consider sports a leisure activity. Like, you don't get paid to do it, but you have to be wealthy enough to play. So like most of the people who participate in sport are rich, because you have to be rich to not get paid to play, right? It's kind of a chicken and egg situation. But eventually, as you all know, the Olympics opens itself up to pro sports before you're born. For me, it's the Michael Jordan, going to the Olympics after he plays in the NBA. He wins a gold medal before, I think, he goes to the NBA as an amateur, and then he's allowed to go back because the Olympics becomes a very expensive thing. And the more famous you are, the more people watch, the better. Hosting the Olympics costs the nation who does it. As you can see, only rich nations have hosted the Olympics because you can't do it. You can't do it if you don't have enough money. So all these things, they're representative of what we know of British culture: the leisure, the wealth, the history, right? The language, all of it comes together in that crest, you know? So when we talk about historical context, cultural context, and social context, which is going to be part of your assignment when we come back to class, what we're talking about really is analyzing things like this, right? Looking at things from different perspectives. I'm talking to you about the historical aspect mostly here, but I did mention a Liverpool fan, whether they're Everton or Liverpool, supporter, punching me for saying the slogan. What is the slogan? Using their saying, their catchphrase, in the wrong crowd. That's enough to get you in trouble. That's a social context thing. Somebody punching me because I'm not aware of the social environment. That's a social thing, right? It's happening at the moment. If you're confused about that, what it represents as an idea, Everton as a representation, as a symbolic representation of the idea of Britain, right? All these concepts like leisure and wealth and religion, these are abstract things. That's cultural context. And of course, the historical stuff I've already pointed out to you. There's certain dates where things happen, and there's a certain order. They get the idea from. The tower is a medieval thing in the picture. The Latin obviously is Roman, right? The religion is developed, and the split between Catholic and Protestant will produce, two factions which fight each other for years and years. And many, many people will die. Many more people than the Crusades. Ironically, they are better at killing themselves than they are at killing other people. So, evolution, as I have called it, still represents sort of a steady violence, which has to be overcome. And I think that's part of the reason why British culture is a little bit conservative, is because when you see a revolution happen, a real revolution, usually it happens very quickly, and there's a lot of violence, right? I've already heard Republicans say something like, this is a revolution, and if the liberals and the Democrats want to go along with it, it can be a bloodless revolution. Like, nobody has to get hurt unless you want to make it tough. Like, usually there's people who resist the revolution. Those people get attacked. But as happens in the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution and any revolution, big revolution I can think of, the Industrial Revolution is an exception. We'll talk about that. That's more of an evolution. But any revolution is going to cause a lot of instability. Usually people are going to suffer a lot. It's going to be very painful, sometimes quick, sometimes not, but it suddenly happens. Things suddenly happen, and they're hard to. Everything becomes very unpredictable. That's what I feel like the United States is right now. It's very unpredictable. It's becoming unstable, and that is a clear sign that revolutionary behavior is happening. Okay, back to the medieval times. So the medieval times, what the medieval people of British society really want, and in particular for Europeans, the Franks, right? Francia, which will become France later. These guys, what they want most, the church wants, is stability. They don't want things to be unstable like they are. They want the Roman Empire. They want peace or war, but everybody moving together and believing in the same thing. That's the key thing there. So when Pope Urban gives his sermon and calls for people to go to the Middle East and recapture Jerusalem and the Holy Land where Jesus lived and died, who is the linchpin of the Christian faith. What he's asking people to do is everybody focus on what's important, which is religion, not personal wealth or success or power, but those things don't go away. They just get directed away from fighting each other. So you end up with, a European sort of alliance where and it falls apart pretty quickly. And as soon as the Islamic, countries, their own factions, Islam's own groups of people who are fighting with each other realize that what they need to do is just stop fighting each other and fight the Christians, get rid of them. They do. So for us, the Crusades here, I'm still talking about page 70 and 71. 69 to 71. These 3 pages really I've only talked about, but as you'll see, I'm not going to test you on all of this stuff. I really think that understanding how culture operates is the most important thing. You can understand, if you understand this, I think you understand British culture as well as any Canadian can. And that's all I'm trying to do is make it so you can understand where British culture comes from and maybe where it's going. That is a very risky thing to do, to predict where things are going, but honestly, I'm pretty proud to say 10 years ago I started this book, and everything is pretty much played out the way I called it. And that is because I did my homework when I wrote this book, and I talked to a lot of people. Some of my American friends gave me some great insight and have continued to, sort of advise me about how I should talk about American culture. I have lots of British friends too, and of course Canada is part of the Commonwealth and was part of the British Empire. So we have our own insights from our perspective on ourselves and what it means to be a part of that. Obviously, I didn't live 900 years ago, so all I can say is to suggest that this has a huge influence on the way British culture develops, and that this idea of religion being at the center of everything contributes to, drawing British culture towards France, towards Europe, and towards the Middle East as its focus. What's the purpose of this culture, and what are we doing here? King Richard, who gets reimagined sort of as a romantic hero in Robin Hood, which is not true at all. Robin Hood, probably the story of Robin Hood and the the bards and the minstrels singing a song about Robin Hood probably didn't happen until about in the early 14th century, and Richard was long dead by that point. So Richard is important to talk about because he is the archetype of an Arthurian knight. He is King Arthur, as close probably as any king, I would say, gets to being King Arthur. He has a sword. He calls it Excalibur. Excalibur is an awesome name, I think, mostly because that's King Arthur's sword. It's the sword he pulls out of the stone. It's a sword that Merlin the wizard gets from the pond, from the lady in the lake. He sticks it in the sword, and then only the person who's destined to lead England in its Britain in its rejuvenation against the evil Anglo-Saxons. Only he's going to be able to pull it out of the stone, and then he does, and that sword's name is Excalibur. So in real life, because King Arthur is just a story, in real life, Richard becomes that guy who has the sword, and he goes to the Middle East and he fights a person. Now I know he's Kurdish. He's in Egypt and he's in Syria and he's in Turkey periodically, but his ethnicity is Kurdish. He's a Kurd. He becomes the leader of the Islamic military, and he builds it up to the point where he takes Jerusalem. The Crusades take Jerusalem for the Christians, but he takes it back, and the Christians will never get Jerusalem back after that. He's basically, I mean, he's the hero of the Muslim side. His title is Saladin, but he has a much longer Kurdish name. So in class, maybe I'll ask my Uzbek students to pronounce that for you. So people who know him, maybe Islamic students, will help me out and tell me what his real name is. But he's a warrior who has a huge army, and him and Richard have famous confrontations. They never actually meet each other, but they send each other gifts and they send each other warnings, and their armies fight each other multiple times. And Richard is successful in pushing back Saladin temporarily while he's there. He spends most of his time in France and the Middle East, very short time in Britain. So some people don't really consider him, I mean, some people weren't super happy that he was taking a whole bunch of money from England and using it to fight really far away. However, he keeps winning, and he's one of those Alexander the Great type people who leads from the front. So he's on his horse and he's running around cutting people in half with his sword. I mean, that's just the way the approach was. Like, you had to be a war hero. You needed to be an effective king. You had to be, a knight, and he was. He was a terrifying fighter and a very good general. And when people saw him cutting through people at the beginning when they attacked with their army, it was very, very effective. Saladin did not, as far as I know, engage people personally in battle. He was more of a strategic general. But anyway, they were sort of pretty well balanced. The battles were very, very long and well, sometimes they were short, sometimes they were long, but they were close. So finally, Richard decides he's going to go back because his French counterpart goes back first. Philip, he gets a little bit angry. They don't like each other. Philip goes back, and Richard decides he has to go back to France because at this time England has parts of France. So I am going to talk about a little bit about the royal family and how France and England get so entangled with each other that they stop. I mean, they basically just fight each other and stop. This is from Richard returning, and he ends up dying before he gets back to England. And then Prince John, his younger brother, he becomes king, and he's a horrible king, and he loses all of the land that England has in France. So it's a disaster for England when Richard dies on the way home. He dies from getting an infected wound. We talked about shaving. People didn't shave that much because just cutting yourself could kill you. So he takes a he takes a crossbow bolt. I can't remember where it hit him, but he gets shot by a crossbow bolt, and the wound becomes infected and it kills him. And he forgives the guy who shoots him, and then the English, burn him and cut him up and do horrible things to him after the king dies. So he got forgiven, but as soon as Richard is dead, his friends take it out on the guy who killed him, who was defending a castle that Richard was attacking in France. So all of these things, they sort of, the castles that the Normans built to control England are the same type of castles that they build down around Jerusalem in Syria. Those castles, some of them still exist. Some of them are much bigger than the Norman castles. They develop castle building technology, and this is how they control the Middle East for a century and a half, a few generations anyway. And then the Muslims expel them, and they won't be back to Jerusalem until the end of World War One. So that's it. They get rid of the British, the Franks, the English, all of the Crusaders, and the Westerners will not come back to Jerusalem again for about 600 years. So that the legacy of the Crusades is something people talk about a lot. Like, what does it mean? To a certain extent, it is a sort of empire building, effort. They go overseas. The French call it outre-mer, which is over the sea. It's very difficult to do that, but that is what the British Empire is. It'll become the largest empire ever, even bigger than the Mongolian Empire, because the British end up controlling the ocean, and they have parts of the empire all over the place that are over the sea, on the other side of the sea. And the Crusades are an example of that. They are the Europeans collaborating in an effort to establish an over the sea empire, and they will continue to do that kind of thing. They will take a break and fight each other for a few hundred years, and then in the Renaissance, in the distant future, they'll pick up where they left off, and the colonization of the Americas will be the result of that. So we'll talk about that in a subsequent lecture. I hope I've explained that enough. I think the book doesn't have near the information I've told you. So remember, the lectures, the book, that's the material. Some people are asking me, there's nothing else. I'm not going to ask you something that I didn't talk about in lecture. That's, something outside the scope of the chapter or my lecture material. There's nothing else you need to be worried about. Okay? So when you're studying, focus on what I'm saying in the lecture and what's in the textbook. That's the guidelines, okay, for future reference, because we do have to have one more quiz before the midterm. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon.